Welcome to the report for day 423 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Thank you for joining me. Today I have one article I want to highlight. I also have one extra segment about the Belgorod explosion. I did not expect it to turn into a major news segment, but there have been quite a few developments here. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. Before we start the news though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. It was reported that Russia finally managed to cut off the O0506 road near Khomove. However, additional sources claim Ukraine managed to push Russian forces back during the day. While the road has not been used in a while, it would still be a significant step forward for Russia. Avdiivka. Fighting continues around Avdiivka without any notable change in the front line. Marinka. Fighting continues around Marinka without any notable change in the front line. The Russian so-called Z assault units recruited from convicts have been deployed to Marinka. This was announced by the spokesman of the defense forces of the Tavria region, Oleksiy Dmitrashkivsky. These units are given orders not to evacuate any wounded from the battlefield in order not to distract those who are still able to fight from advancing. And now for the article I wanted to highlight, titled "They'll kill me if I come back. Abduction, torture become routine in Russian-occupied Melitopol." Melitopol residents have become accustomed to the disappearance of their neighbors and relatives since the beginning of Russia's invasion. The residents have been living in fear of being kidnapped and disappear in one of the city's basements over a talk since the city fell to the Russians in March 2022. For this story, the Kyiv Independent talked to residents who recently left Russian-occupied Melitopol but still have family in the city. For their safety, the journalists do not identify them by their full name. This incredibly interesting but harrowing article gives an insight to the hardships and horrors civilians face in their daily lives in the occupied territories. If you are comfortable with this kind of information, please give the article a read. And to start the news segment, the latest updates on the Belgorod explosion. Another explosive device has been found near the site of a bomb explosion in Belgorod, Russia. 17 apartment buildings have been evacuated, the governor of Kursk Oblast Vyacheslav Gladkov stated. Footage of the bomb being dug out and of the evacuation proceedings has been shared on social media. According to analysts, the bomb seems to be an FAB-500 with a payload of 300 kilograms. As the dust clears, more footage of the aftermath is being shared. In this video, a car was removed from the roof of a building after it was thrown up there by an explosion. This picture in particular very nicely shows the car on top of the roof, with the explosion crater below. A curious video shared on social media shows a strange explosion in the sky, claiming it is from Belgorod on the night of the incident. However, it is unknown if it was recorded before or after the explosion. Another video shared on social media allegedly shows a dump truck transporting the bomb to a disposal site. According to official reports, so far 3 people were injured and 1 building seems to be heavily damaged. Experts are checking the structural integrity and residents have been relocated. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed a law on the condemnation and prohibition of propaganda of Russian imperial policy in Ukraine and the decolonization of toponymy, establishing a ban on the distribution of symbols of Russian imperial policy throughout Ukraine. Search teams of the Ukrainian armed forces have found nearly 500 bodies of missing Ukrainian soldiers since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. Enerhodar, Ukraine's nuclear energy company, and the US company Holtec International have signed an agreement to build up to 20 nuclear power units with SMR-160 reactors in Ukraine. During the night, Russian forces attacked Ukraine with 5 Shahed kamikaze drones, 4 of which were destroyed by air defense forces. Russian forces also dropped a guided bomb from an aircraft on Chernihiv Oblast. An explosion was recorded near Olikivka village. According to Alexei Resnikov, Ukraine's defense minister, the 11th meeting of the Contact Group for the Defense of Ukraine at the Ramstein air base in Germany brought Russia closer to a tribunal similar to the one in Nuremberg. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. According to Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol, an explosion occurred in the occupied city this morning. The Kremlin-appointed governor of the occupied Zaporizhia Oblast, Yevgeny Balitsky, confirmed the event, claiming saboteurs set off the explosion on the premises of the train depot. Sergei Aksionov, Kremlin-appointed leader of Crimea, claimed that the air defense system had been activated in Crimea and that there were no casualties. The mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea reported that less than 1/3 of the 182 Crimean political prisoners are currently held on the territory of the temporarily occupied peninsula. All others were deported to Russia. Russian troops have intensified checks of Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied city of Enerhodar, Zaporizhia Oblast. A Russian-controlled court in occupied Crimea sentenced the Crimean Tatar to 7 years in prison for allegedly transferring 500 Ukrainian hryvnia, about $12, to a Ukrainian volunteer battalion, also called Crimea. Russian channels claim that this morning explosions were heard in the city of Kerch near the bridge. Pro-Russian channel Rybar reported that Ukraine tried to attack the bridge with a Hom-2 missile system. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Roman Starovoyt, governor of Russia's Kursk Oblast, has claimed that attacks have been allegedly carried out by Ukraine on several villages, which have been cut off from the power grid as a result. Russia currently has 11 warships on combat duty in the Black Sea. 2 of them are missile carriers with a total salvo of up to 8 cruise missiles. According to Andriy Yusov, a spokesman for the main intelligence directorate at Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, Russian elites are wary of their future and are therefore looking for contacts with Ukraine and other countries in order to seal security guarantees for themselves after Russia loses the war. Russia has started to prepare the Red Square for this year's May 9th victory parade. According to the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, 10,000 people and 125 vehicles will take part. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Germany has expelled more than 30 Russian diplomats from Berlin due to suspicions that they were conducting sabotage operations and disinformation campaigns. In response, Russia has expelled 20 German diplomats, accusing Berlin of pursuing a policy of destroying the entire array of Russian-German relations. Portugal will send 5 armored rescue and medical vehicles to Ukraine, Portuguese Defense Minister Helena Carreiras said at a meeting of the Contact Group for the Defense of Ukraine at the Ramstein air base in Germany. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has responded to an invitation to visit Ukraine. Instead of going himself, he decided to send his envoy to Kyiv. Meanwhile, Ukrainians in Portugal held a rally near the Brazilian embassy in Lisbon, protesting against the comments made by the Brazilian president about the war in Ukraine. During an interview with a Swiss journalist, the Chinese ambassador to France stated that all former Soviet countries have no effective status in international law, effectively denying the existence of Ukraine, Lithuania, Estonia, Kazakhstan, and other countries. Spain will supply 6 of the 10 promised Leopard 2A4 tanks to Ukraine in the coming days. According to online messages reviewed by the New York Times, US Air National Guardsman Jack Teixeira, accused of leaking classified Pentagon documents, began posting classified data in February 2022, just after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Finland has announced its 15th military aid package to Ukraine. The government of Japan has announced a grant contribution of $471 million to the World Bank's Ukraine Relief, Recovery, Reconstruction and Reform Trust Fund. And now for the Intelligence Report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. The Russian state is struggling to maintain consistency in a core narrative that it uses to justify the war in Ukraine, that the invasion is analogous to the Soviet experience in the Second World War. On April 18, 2023, Russian state media announced the cancellation of this year's Immortal Regiment Great Patriotic War remembrance marches on safety grounds. In reality, the authorities were highly likely concerned that participants would highlight the scope of recent Russian losses. This follows Wagner Group owner Yevgeny Prigozhin publicly questioning whether there are actually any Nazis in Ukraine, going against Russia's justification for the war. The authorities have continued attempts to unify the Russian public around polarizing myth about the 1940s. On April 12, 2023, state news agency RIA Novosti reported unique documents from FSB archives implicating the Nazis in the murder of 22,000 Polish nationals in the Katyn massacre of 1940. In reality, FSB's predecessor agency, the NKVD, was responsible. Russia's State Duma officially condemned Joseph Stalin for ordering the killings in 2010. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian forces used the new delivery of Shahed drones to strike Ukraine for the third consecutive day, targeting Kyiv for the first time in 25 days. Commander of the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet, Admiral Viktor Lina, reportedly assumed command of the Russian Pacific Fleet on April 21st, following the completion of Russian drills in the Pacific on April 20th. A Russian fighter bomber accidentally bombed Belgorod on April 20th. The Angry Patriots Club accused Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin of supporting efforts to freeze the war in Ukraine. This accusation may also indicate that Prigozhin has found a patron, possibly affiliated with the Russian MOD, who supports the temporary freeze of the war in Ukraine for political reasons. A temporary ceasefire in Ukraine and protraction of the war will only benefit Russia by allowing it to reconstitute its forces and wear down Western support for Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a law aimed at supporting the Kremlin's ongoing effort to set conditions for domestic crackdowns and the removal of officials who have fallen out of favor. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive operations in the Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka directions. About 40 enemy attacks were repulsed against them. The fiercest battles continue for Bakhmut and Marinka. The enemy did not carry out any offensive operations in the Liman direction today. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy continues to conduct offensive actions. Heavy fighting continues for the city of Bakhmut. Near the settlements of Kryhorivka, Khomove and Ivanivske, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions. In the Avdiivka direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the area of Novokalinovo, Donetsk Oblast, without success. In the Marinka direction, during the day, our defenders repelled numerous enemy attacks in the area of Marinka settlement of the Donetsk Oblast. During the current day, the enemy did not conduct offensive operations in the Shakhtarsk direction. The Russian occupiers continue to strengthen the counterintelligence regime in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Thus, in Enerhodar of the Zaporizhia Oblast, the numbers of patrols has been increased, personal documents and vehicles have been inspected more carefully at checkpoints. Occupiers restricted visits to forest areas. Employees of the FSB of the Russian Federation take control of citizens of Ukraine who have been spotted in these locations and check their personal data. At the same time, representatives of the Russian special services in the city organized covert surveillance of Ukrainian citizens who refused to obtain a Russian passport. They take into account, in particular, the sources of financial income of such citizens. Representatives of the FSB of the Russian Federation are interested in how funds are transferred from the territory under the control of the government of Ukraine to the temporarily occupied territories of the Oblast and how these funds are converted into cash. At the same time, due to the critical shortage of qualified workers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant who are ready to work for the occupiers, the enemy increased psychological and physical pressure on the Ukrainian workers of the ZNPP. Using intimidation, threats, blackmail, and torture, the enemy continues to force the latter to obtain Russian citizenship and sign employment contracts with the Russian state corporation Rosatom. And with that, today's report is finished. Should you be interested in any article I mentioned and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.